Oh, shoot. Counselor Stapleton?
I'm here.
Counselor Anderson is trying to log on. Counselor Phillips?
Here.
Counselor Leung?
Here.
Counselor Nordyke? Also trying to log on. Counselor Hoy?
Here.
Counselor Lewis?
Here.
Mayor Bennett?
Here. Okay. Chris, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Certainly.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to turn this over to you, Courtney, and have you kind of I believe you're the person who's going to be kind of running this to take us through all this tonight.
Excellent. Yes. So we have our consulting firm, Moss Adams, on point, who's been running the strategic plan update process for us, and all of the outreach and communication and engagement that we're doing collectively. Today, we have for you a presentation that we'd like to make to kind of share how the vision, mission, and values statements have changed as a result of your last conversation in November. And then we have the priority areas, which we think reflect your feedback as well. And we'd like to really spend some time with you tonight on the policy agenda priorities, those things that are for year one implementation. And we've got a couple of key questions we're hoping we can kind of work through together as part of this work session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen Rosillas, who's from Moss Adams. You guys might remember her from our last work session and earlier even in September when we met to consider our approach to the strategic plan update. So thank you, Colleen.
All right, well, thanking me in advance is a dangerous game, but I will take it, Courtney. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I just want to acknowledge it feels like lots has changed since the last time that we met, and it keeps changing, and we're at a time when people can be distracted. So I really appreciate you spending your time with us this evening focused on this subject. We've made a lot of progress on the strategic plan since we last met, thanks to the city's leadership team for really putting in a lot of effort into developing all of our actions. And so we bring forward to you a proposed first-year action plan, as well as some changes to kind of the basis of the plan. I'm also joined here tonight by Annie Rose Favreau, who's been working on this project and working with the city with me. And so we'll walk through these pieces of the plan. We have key questions, but please feel free to jump in even without the questions. We want to get your feedback. We really want you to feel a great sense of ownership over this so that we can really hit the ground running and get implementing the plan as we move forward. So I'll go ahead and share my PowerPoint. All right. There we go. Okay, so first we're going to cover mission, vision, values. If you recall the last time that we met, we made a couple of minor tweaks to the mission and vision statements, and then we talked about revisiting the values statements after your DEI training. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. So our first set is to just take a look at the mission and vision. We made just a couple of changes based on what we heard from the survey and the feedback that we got in our one-on-one conversations with you. And so the vision statement is slightly adjusted. We did add that extra comma in as requested. So the vision is a safe, livable, and sustainable capital city with a thriving economy and a vibrant community that is welcoming to all. And the mission statement is also just a little bit adjusted, provides fiscally sustainable and quality services to enrich the lives of present and future residents, the quality of our environment and neighborhoods, and the vitality of our economy. So this is our proposed vision and mission. Any thoughts, any additions or changes to these statements? All right, I'm hearing silence, so I'm going to take that as thumbs up from everyone, and we can move on. Okay, and I'm seeing nods, so all right, great. Look, we're already ahead of schedule. Okay, so we've got some values here. This is a lot on one slide. You were provided this in advance, but I just want to give you a little bit of time to take a look. So we are adjusting the values kind of based on what we learned from resident surveys, from the information that we've collected across the board. We wanted to make some changes to the values. And so we've got community focused, inclusive, proactive, accountable, and respectful. If you want to take a moment to read, and then if any of you have kind of thoughts just on high level, these values categories, whether we kind of have it covered. One of the ways that we like to talk about values is really thinking about ourselves as an organization, as an employer, right? How would we describe how we treat each other? How would we describe how we interact with the community? Really, who are we? And our values are a great way to distinguish ourselves as an organization from other organizations in the community.
Sir,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't understand the proactive one. There must be a typo in there, or I'm just not understanding the first sentence.
Councilor Hoy, is it the word?
Should say delivering measurable results to our community.
There we go.
Thank you for that.
We're missing a gerund there.
But Councilor Hoy, are you also suggesting it assumes we're looking ahead of the problems rather than back at them? Is that the part that's how I feel about the word proactive, is you're kind of ahead of the game, not running behind. Is that?
Yeah. No, I'm fine with the proactive part, and I like it.
Okay.
I just couldn't make the sense of it. I couldn't figure out the gerund in my head. So thank you.
Thanks for pointing that out.
What about the word equitable? Is that going to be in there somewhere?
Yeah, so we have at the beginning of inclusive, we're committed to ensuring equity and accessibility. We could include equitable when we refer to services in the community focused area, or when we think about also, I think in any of these statements we could add equitable if you'd like.
I think we need to really hone in and ensure that the word equitable is mentioned more than just once.
What's it mean, Counselor? What do you mean by equitable?
Well, like when we're making decisions, are we making decisions that are fair, taking consideration the impact that the historical impact, especially on BIPOC communities? I mean, and later on, it looks like we have, which I'm grateful for, to see both the resolution as well as the statement that resolution number 2021-2 and 2021-X, that racism is a public health crisis and racism and condemning racism and white supremacy. So I just wanted to make sure, like, the main messaging behind those of like where the Salem, especially as leadership, make decisions when it comes to community related decisions.
Okay. Yeah, Chris.
Thank you. On accountable, I'm not sure about the last sentence. When we say we will do something, we do it. I mean, I appreciate the sentiment, but things change, and sometimes we have to change course. We have to be nimble, and we have to reconsider things and do something different. And I'm not sure that allows for that, or even though I agree with the sentiment of the sentence, I'm not sure it's really appropriate here.
Okay. I'm wondering, Steve, is there anything that you want to say about the accountability value here? Because I know this really came from the management team.
No, I think we could strike the second sentence. I think the important words are the integrity, transparency, and honesty. And I think that implies when we say something, we're going to do it unless there's a reason to change what we're going to do. And then we'll tell you, which is being transparent, not hiding the ball, not setting it aside, hoping you all or we all forget about it. We'll tell you, what we're going to do. And if it changes, we'll tell you why.
Got it. Thanks.
Yes, Virginia.
Thank you. In my meetings lately with neighborhood associations, a lot has been coming up about communication and increasing our communication between the city and our neighborhood associations, or between the city and its residents. In that accountability piece, if we strike out that second sentence, is there some way that we could maybe take Mr. Powers' sentiments about, communicating that change, and maybe come up with something there that kind of gives a nod to the need of having greater community engagement and communication between the different players?
Yeah, I think so. I think we could either put it there, or we could put it in the community-focused value, but we could certainly put in more about communication, definitely. All right, if there are no more big picture comments, then what I'd like to do is actually get to our first key question, which is really to dig into your DEI training and really look at this inclusive value statement a little bit more closely. Obviously, this is also tied to the resolutions that are also on the agenda this evening. And what we really want to think about is, do we need to make any more updates? Do we need to strengthen this language? Do we need to adjust this language at all? We know that you all have been working on this really intently for some time. And so we want to make sure that we're truly reflecting this as a core value of the organization.
I think it's good. I think it's. I think it hits the mark.
Anyone else?
I like it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll say it gives us all the flexibility to be successful.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's
all right.
Move on.
You're making this a little bit easy. Not that I'm asking you to make it difficult, but
you guys did a real good
all right.
job.
So just a little bit of framing comments around what we're doing. So we just talked about mission, vision, values, right? And if you remember our very first work session, that's, when we're making decisions, right? We're thinking about, does this align with our mission? Is it helping us to achieve our vision? Is it in line with our values? And if it's not, we're not going to do it, right? We're going to have a really hard conversation about why we're going to stray from those things. So next up, we're looking at our city goals. And these are measured with citywide performance measures. And we're also really thinking about within our city goals, our priority-based budgeting, right? The things that are very important to us, what our core services are. And then we've got our strategic plan, and these are our priorities for the next 3 to 5 years. So we've got that presented to you tonight, as well as these potential first actions for your council policy agenda. And we'll be creating performance measures associated with these as well to help with reporting out, okay, here's what we said we would do, here's where we are. And then after our strategic plan is approved, hopefully next month, we're going to start working on departmental implementation plans. So we have 5 strategic priorities. These came from management, the community, from all of you. The first, overwhelmingly, reducing homelessness. That was absolutely the #1 thing that the residents cared about. #1 theme from talking to all of you, really important to all city staff. The second is the concept of creating community resilience. So COVID is going to cast a shadow on this plan, right? It casts a shadow on everything that we do. And whatever happens in terms of economic recovery, that's going to have, a long tail. And so we want to really build that into how we plan and are able to move forward. We also want to be able to think about everything the city has been through in this past year and how we can become more resilient as change and as challenges impact us. And so really trying to create a more resilient organization and a more resilient community. Next is improving resident access to city services. So truly thinking about improving customer service from a customer perspective. building great neighborhoods. That was also a great theme that we heard from our conversations with all of you, truly focused on how do we create better, more connected neighborhoods across the city. And then finally, no surprise, taking action on climate change. So we've got that climate action plan in development, and we want to honor that and make sure that's also included in the strategic plan. Something that also is really important for us to note as we go through this process is that we've got a lot of planning going on at the city right now. So we're not doing the strategic plan in a vacuum. We're doing the climate action plan. We're doing our Salem. We're about to embark on library strategic planning. There is a lot going on in the community, and we want to honor those planning efforts. We don't want to get ahead of them, and we want to make sure that we are able to let those finish and then help to implement them. And that's part of the discussions that we have been having with the management team as well. So making sure that we implement those and honor those and all of the work that's going into those. So you'll see those reflected as we go through the actions in the plan. So our first objective or goal area is sorry, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. Here we go. Okay, so our first strategic priority is reducing homelessness. We have 3 objectives under this area, and they are responding to the sheltering crisis, so really thinking about those immediate actions for individuals who are unhoused, thinking about preventing homelessness, what actions can the city take there, and then also providing additional housing. And so our proposed year 1 actions, we've got 7 of them on this slide, and they're really focused on thinking about how we can participate in, coordinate, collaborate in a regional effort to address homelessness, both in response and prevention. And that includes things like helping to develop action plans, helping to address sheltering, and thinking about when our Salem is complete, updating our housing needs analysis, understanding what our housing needs are and where the gaps are, and then identifying opportunities for permanent supportive housing, exploring the Cahoots model, and continuing to look at a housing first model. So I'd love to hear reactions about these actions. Couple things to think about here. Does this seem achievable? Does it seem reasonable? Is this enough for us to take on? Is it too much? Is there something missing?
Yes, actually, I had a question or a comment. If I remember correctly from our last discussion, if you could go back 1 slide, please, for a moment.
Sure.
So please correct me if I'm wrong. I thought we had put affordable housing in right below reducing homelessness as a priority of ours. And when I go forward a slide, it appears that what you guys have done is taken that as a priority, but really folded it into this reducing homelessness category, where I see update housing needs analysis to identify local needs and gaps, explore opportunities to create additional permanent supportive housing. But I really feel that calling out affordable housing and the profound shortage of that here in Salem is really important. And if we don't even have that identified by name in here, I feel that we're not making it a priority. And affordable housing, I think we talked about this last time, it can really mean a variety of things. It can mean a lot of different price points. It can mean everything from tiny homes that low-income seniors who have, $500 a month can afford. It may mean those who, are within 60% of the poverty margin and so on. So it recognizes the spectrum of individuals who have some money to contribute each month towards their housing needs, but it just varies by price point and where those folks come from. So I would like to see affordable housing identified more prominently as part of this.
Anyone else?
I have a question about that. The city doesn't actually provide affordable housing, so I would think we want to limit this, or at least specify, what is our intent with it? Is it to provide incentives for developers to do affordable housing, or what exactly are we saying? I mean, because we're not actually going to be building affordable housing, so I'm curious how we could put that into something that's actually actionable by the city.
Well, we can absolutely put in the verb incentivize affordable housing. And I know that through projects like Redwoods Crossings, I mean, to a certain extent, we are already in the affordable housing business by working with a variety of community partners to make affordable housing options happen. But I support the idea of putting in incentivizing, because that can mean a variety of things too. It could mean tax incentives to developers. It could mean making zoning changes to make tiny homes more available to certain parts of town. It could mean taking advantage of smart infill options, incentivizing multifamily housing, and so on. So I appreciate the distinction. I think we could address that by putting the word incentivize affordable housing in there.
And then this is Councilor Phillips. I just want to make sure, I think it's, if I read between the lines, it's probably captured in this pretty, comprehensive list here, but I just want to make sure that the navigation center, that the idea that that's, like our number one thing that we're always working on until it is actually built. And then, big fan of the idea of a sobering center. So those things, I don't know that we have to say them specifically, but since I'm not seeing them, I want to be reassured that they're implied.
Do you think, Councilor, there probably at least one place I can see them is exploring options to implement a Kahoot-style first responder model. We got to have some place to respond from and to, and that really does start to call upon us to look at just exactly the kind of services and programs you're talking about. Does that fit?
Yeah, I
need it more specific.
Yeah.
It could fit.
I think it could fit, but there's the kind of the first bullet about collaboration between us and our partners. I think that's part of it. And the second is that Kahoot model. And then I just wanted to speak, Councilor Nordyke, the affordable housing incentivizing. So when we took in all the actions for the plan and spread them out over 3 to 5 years, so the first year action is to update that housing needs analysis and figure out where we are and what we need. And the second year action is to work to incentivize and to increase affordable housing. I do think we can absolutely figure out how to put some language here, but we definitely wanted to sequence those accordingly.
That makes sense to me. And I would also just remind folks that when we had Tim Black come and speak from Cahoots, I don't know how many work sessions or city council meetings ago, Mr. Black pointed out the fact that many, if not the majority of Cahoots calls do not require transport. So I want to make sure that we understand that based on the experts from Cahoots, which has been in service for some 20 to 30 years now, we have to make sure we understand that, yes, some would be transported places such as a sobering center, but that's not how the majority of the calls resolve. A lot of them are resolved right there on the ground. So I just want to be clear on that as we move forward.
I thought it was kind of a mixed message from him, actually. So it was sort of like you need to have both, really, that you can do it on the ground and you also have, when you need it, a place to take them. And so that's what I heard him saying. And they had a long standing over that 20-some years of developing the kind of infrastructure you need to deal with the kind of problems they're going to be confronting. So
I understand where you're coming from, but again, the majority of their calls don't require transport, period. That's what he told us. Ideally, if you have, Mr. Mayor, I'm speaking. Ideally, if you have the full suite of services, that's what you would like. But I just want to remind you the information that we've gleaned thus far is that it's not essential for every call. In fact, not even a part of every call.
Yeah, that we heard a different story. I understand. Okay, anything else? Okay, let's move on then. Oh, sorry, Jose.
No, one of the things, I'm sure Gretchen knows this, but a lot of the questions and concerns that come from our community are around a lot of the things we can or can't do. So it's taking away time and energy from actually reducing homelessness. So we can just make sure to have a central location for all the information and even just generally ask questions, because it's, I'm sure we all see those emails and it's just the same question being asked over and over. And I think if we can have a centralized place for that information and we're constantly sharing it, then we can keep moving forward. Because if we keep moving forward and the community is not on the same page, we're going to keep hitting a lot of resistance as we move through this process.
I think it's my understanding that the Navigation Center could fill that role, Councilor Gonzalez. And I think that like the two biggest, beneficial things would probably be the combination of a Navigation Center and a Cahoots model. I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, but they would certainly work very well together. And then in a perfect world, we'd also get a sobering center.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir. How are you,
Thank you.
Tom?
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry I'm late. I've had a series of Luddite-related computer problems, and I finally just got in. So I missed the first 20 meetings after a half hour of frustration. But so I see where we are. We're on page 4 of 7. Have we discussed pages 1, 2, 3 before already in this meeting?
Yes, we have.
Okay, so I have some comments that I'm not going to take the group's time now, but who would be the person to whom I should direct those comments? Colleen? Okay, so Colleen, we can communicate, tomorrow or after the meeting tonight. I have some real comments about number 4 in year 2, and then I got a couple other comments about things that were beforehand. And I will just start for the council. My comments about 4 are kind of related to an email we all got from Mr. Shepke about, do we have a growing public safety needs related to crime? And I'll discuss that more, but I'm happy. I'm sorry I got in late. I'm happy to move on with the meeting.
Okay. Colleen, let's move forward then.
All right, great. So key question for us to address with respect to this is really to think about whether we've covered the regional aspect. And actually, I think Councilmember Gonzalez touched on this idea of what is the city's role, what can the city do, what can't the city do, and what should our role be? So we have really focused on that regional language. We want to make sure that that language makes sense to you and accurately reflects that. I think we may have actually already covered this in our discussion, but just want to make sure we're directly addressing this question.
Chris, you're the person that really represent us on these regional issues. Does this cover what you're finding or want to do, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And it's broad enough to pick up everything you all are up to as a regional group?
I'm not sure that I would limit it to sheltering crisis, although maybe that's meaning something different than I'm thinking. That's just not a term we typically have used. So if we're talking about getting people just off the streets in terms of getting them into shelter, that would make sense. But if we're speaking into a shelter, which is kind of a specific thing, then that is too limiting. But otherwise, I think it's fine.
Okay, and this really is the language that will go into the plan with that first year agenda right here on this slide. That was just contextual question information.
Great, thank you.
Okay, awesome. All right, so then we also have a question here around this idea of really checking in continuously with you all. Like I mentioned before, we've got a lot of planning efforts going on. And we just want to make sure that we're constantly moving forward on those and implementing them accordingly. So do you have any questions or feedback around this idea of all this other stuff that's going on and kind of where we are in the process of doing a strategic plan? And I don't know if Steve, if there's anything that you want to say here, because I know this is very important for us to make sure we address tonight.
One of the, if I may, Mayor, one of the points that the management team discussed was, from our perspective, the importance of really, as Colleen said in her introductory comments, kind of respecting the significant planning initiatives that council has initiated, that council has funded, and not having, unless it's at the direction of council through this plan, through this document, not having one of those initiatives jump ahead of another, to have respect for the process. And as you might expect from staff, we tend to look at process, and we didn't want any one of these four to move ahead artificially from the others, because each is a very significant undertaking by the city, initiatives that council has approved, that council has funded. Is that what you were looking for, Colleen?
Yep.
Okay.
May I say something, Mayor?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. I don't know if you can see us, so I'm just gonna.
I can't.
Call out. Yes.
Yeah, do shout out. I can't.
Thank you.
I can't see you all.
My question is, and I think maybe this is just a statement, what you're asking here is, my thought is that when we go to do something, or when somebody looks at a climate action plan or the Salem plan or the strategic plan, they should be able to see the through lines, right? Things should be somewhat interconnected, or kind of play off of each other, or you should be able to notice, right? Any community member, hopefully, when looking at this, kind of how we've thought this out and how it's all really dependent upon each other and moving together as kind of one unit, but in different ways. Is that what you're wondering?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm sensing agreement on this, so I think we can move forward. So let's talk about creating community resilience. So we have three main areas under community resilience. One is around supporting our local businesses, particularly those that have been most impacted by the pandemic. That is supported by working on the economic development strategy and finalizing that, supporting local businesses, and also taking a look at what we might have that actually is a roadblock to small business expansion. And then we also have job creation here, and that is both supporting those small businesses and other organizations that are creating jobs in the community, but also thinking about support services to help individuals find jobs, and partnering with other local organizations that can help to strengthen and develop our workforce. And then we've got emergency response. So I think we learned a lot from the wildfires this year, but really thinking about that element of community resilience and how important that is. And so that's related to addressing the aging fire apparatus and equipment, as well as public safety funding. We have this particular this last bullet here around public safety funding. You'll find that in a couple of different places. We wanted to bring to you a number of different ways to potentially address revenue, either in this area really dedicated to public safety and emergency response, and then later on we have related to the broader financial stability of the city. Steve, do you want to say anything about that before we open it up for discussion?
Thank you. From the perspective of the leadership team, in looking at this in a very practical way, I might be jumping ahead here, Colleen, but to do so, the one bullet under this on this chart that is really becoming more and more pressing and concerning to us, the fire chief, our fleet manager, finance director, is the begin to prepare to replace our fire apparatus. And we can go into more detail if council would like. I do want to highlight that because there is a lot of information on this slide to unpack. Council had discussed and approved a revenue measure for public safety staffing. Pandemic hit, we hit pause. Unfortunately, not surprisingly, our demands on the fire department, on the fire fleet, did not decrease, and the aging of the fleet it has become an increasing concern to us. And again, we're prepared to go into more detail with council this evening if council would like. Thank you.
Manager Powers, I do have a quick follow-up to that. As I understand it, there was a measure on some people's ballots regarding the provision of fire services, you know, kind of the outer line areas, and that measure failed. Is that impacting our bottom line as at Salem Fire Department, the fact that that measure failed?
The quick answer is no, and Chief Niblock can provide a little more detail on that if council would like.
That's fine. I was just curious. I know we have a lot to get through tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Anderson.
Thank you. I had this down in an earlier comment, but it's under, before I came in, under community resilience, and we're here there, and it's job creation. And we've had discussions about this that, SEDCOR has told us that 85% of the job creation that they do are for businesses that are Salem grown, that are either startups from Salemites or are increasing the opportunities for these businesses to grow what they produce and how many people they employ, as opposed to spending a lot of time reaching after the Hyundais and the Amazons of the world. So I just want the council to keep that in mind, that we're really, the jobs we want to create are jobs that are homegrown here in Salem, either through new startup corporations in Salem or from ones that need help. And we do that quite a lot in our, the urban renewal stuff and everything else. And that seems to me where the emphasis should be. The final one is on point 0 of that, which is community funding sources. And we've already talked about that. And some of it relates to the fire department, but some of it relates to the police department. And that kind of ties in to the performance audit and how we're going to allocate resources for non-criminal related things. So that's another one of the things, Colleen, that we will want to be, and Virginia, that we will be wanting to fold into this plan as it moves forward once we get the police audit report and have a further discussion of that.
Anyone else? Okay. Colleen, do you want to? Yeah.
All right. So our question here, and I believe this might be our last key question, but the question is, so we had, as Steve noted, we had previously approved the dedicated or, maybe more emphasized public safety focus for new revenue. And so we wanted to check in again with you about that, because if we are going to use that as a focus for year 2, we have to start planning that in year 1. And so that will absolutely be something that comes in front of you in the next year. And we wanted to start having that conversation now, this concept of, are we going to continue to focus on public safety for this particular revenue source?
Anybody?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm here.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep raising my hand.
Well, and the problem is I can't see I only see a couple of people at a time.
We had a discussion of this, obviously, in the past, where we had the 2 different revenue measures, and one of them council passed on its own, the operating fee, I think it was called. And then this one, after some discussion, we decided to refer to the voters. And then we pulled it back because of the COVID stuff. So I don't know, we've got 1, 2, 3 new counselors, and Counselor Nordyke may be new to this. I can't remember where she came in with respect to the revenue kind of issues. So at some point we might want to revisit that and say, revisit it in terms of, do we want to refer to do we need it? And if we need it, do we pass it on our own as a council? Do we refer it to the voters? That's, so that's really beyond this scope. But I think Colleen's question is, do we want to move forward somehow with this?
Councilor Nordyke?
Thank you, Mayor.
So I echo Councillor Anderson's comments. We do have 3 new city councilors on, and you know, I would like to hear what their budget priorities are moving forward. It is needed with COVID or its financial impact at the time that the revenue task force met to consider this. And I would love to hear from my colleagues. It's basically, I couldn't make that decision this evening. As I understand it, we do have a budget committee meeting coming right up, but you know, I would really like to see the numbers, see what our revenues look like, see where money is going out the door, and of course, to hear from our 3 new peers on this issue, because it's critically important to decide where our money goes. And I'd really like to see more of the numbers before I make any decisions. Thank you.
Steve, will that be part of tomorrow evening's discussion at all? What Vanessa's describing, will that be included in some way that could be highlighted?
You'll see tomorrow night the what we can consider the success of the operations fee, the revenue measure that council did enact. That has stabilized our revenue base for the general fund, and general fund is primarily police and fire. It does not allow for growth. It has, though, stabilized our revenue situation. You'll see some high level where the money comes from and where the money goes as far as a deeper analysis that really isn't intended for tomorrow night. Certainly a review of my proposal on where the money should go for the fiscal year starting July 1, you will see in April, and that will be guided by your discussion this evening, by our use of the priority-based budgeting methodology, and certainly the commitments that council has already made. Continuing those is also a key factor for the proposed budget, which again you'll be seeing in April.
One of the things I heard you saying, I want to make sure I understand what you were alluding to, was that really it sounded like your proposals to go up for a vote will probably focus on a bond measure for fire apparatus. Did I understand that's where you all see the for a vote, not for council action, but just for a taking it out to the voters? Do I understand that right?
That's correct, Mayor. And as you and longer, other longer serving councilors may know, the city Salem has used bonding to replace our fleet. And Chief Niblock can give you a quick overview of what we're talking about, the number of apparatus, which is a fancy word for trucks and engines, and what that approximate cost is, and how many successful bond measures the city has had for replacing our fleet.
Chief, did you want to give us a quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mayor and city councilors. We are looking at a 2022 of November bond issue. Our last bond issue was in 2006, which we passed successfully 74% in the community, and it's a pretty high vote rate for a bond. It was a little under 25 million last time. We're going to be around the $26 million mark this time to replace the entire fleet. And I won't run through all the apparatus, but that's basically 16 fire engines and 3 ladder trucks and some various other apparatus and an equipment that goes on that apparatus. The interesting thing is we are spending just under $1 million in 1920 to keep this fleet on the road. So while they look shiny on the outside, we put a ton of miles on them, and we do take good care of them. But this fleet, as an example, our last fleet had about 300,000 motor miles on them when we retired them, and they were well past their point of being reliable at that point in time. this fleet at 16 years, which would be 2023, will have 400,000 motor miles. So almost 100,000 more motor miles because our call volume has increased to such a degree over that period of time of that life of that fleet. So, you know, we're getting to the point where we really need to consider this. Originally, we had planned for 2020, November. Lots of things happened in 2020 that kind of set the clock back for various things, COVID being the biggest one. So that's where we're at, and you know, we want to be able to have the infrastructure to respond to the community's needs, and that the trucks really are our tool, if you will, that allows us to bring our firefighters to the scene and save lives and prevent property damage.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Well, we'll look forward to that discussion. It sounds like something we'll be talking about during the next year or two. Is that correct, Mr. Powers? This is something that'll come up, or how will this?
Yes, we'll come back, you know, following this discussion, following your final adoption of the strategic plan and the policy agenda for the first year. We'll come back then with specific recommendations. Fortunately, we do have experience, a successful experience, and Mike has already mapped out a time frame, so we'll be able to share that with council and begin discussion of whether to proceed, and we are recommending that this be a priority, and then how to proceed.
And then I hope that you know, as Councilor Nordyke pointed out, we have new counselors, and Councilor Anderson, new counselors who have not had an opportunity to really go through the in-depth discussion of alternative methods of raising operating revenue. And that would occur, I assume, on a separate track or at the same time, or how will that all fit together?
You know, certainly we could provide options to council for purposes of this evening's discussion, while we would certainly defer to those who are elected internally, you know, between Mike and me and the other staff. You know, we're hesitant to recommend too much to you, too much to the public, particularly coming off of a pandemic. And Mike, as he mentioned, did have an intent to have the fleet be considered earlier. However, he did step back when the discussion resulted in the employee payroll tax being a priority, that funding additional operating was a priority over replacing our existing fleet. That has changed. So we are reluctant to recommend both, because we want to make sure that we're successful with the fire fleet. However, that is ultimately, you know, a policy decision of council at some point, not necessarily tonight, but that would be, you know, a policy discussion for council at some point in the future. My recommendation is we focus on a successful bond measure for replacing the fire fleet.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor.
Yes, Tom.
No, Councilor Nordyke has had her hand up as well.
I can't see either of you, so let's go first. Go ahead, Councilor Nordyke. I'm sorry, I just can't see you guys.
No problem, I understand, and thank you, Tom. You know, I just did a quick Google search, and I see that the city of Portland had a housing bond that provided affordable housing for families transitioning from homelessness. And I only mention that because I know that bond measures are kind of an extraordinary opportunity to ask the taxpayers to fund priorities. And so I think that, you know, moving ahead, we as a council definitely need to make sure we understand when we support bond measures, there are opportunity costs involved. Every time we support one bond measure, does it come at the expense of another competing priority? And so I fully understand and appreciate the need to replace aging fire equipment apparatus. I know that our first responders have been through an incredibly difficult and challenging year, unlike anything they've probably ever seen. And my hat is off to all of our first responders at Salem Fire, all of our EMTs, paramedics, law enforcement officers, and all of the staff that frequently go on as unsung heroes. But I just want to flag that bond measures can fund any number of priorities, and we as a council will need to decide when and where and how we choose to, stick our necks out, because every bond measure asks for taxpayer dollars to take money out of their pockets. So it's not a decision that can be made lightly. And again, we have so many needs in this community. It's one of the most difficult aspects of our job. So that was just a comment I want to make.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, thanks. I think that this might be an opportunity for the Finance Committee to delve into a little bit of this. And I don't know whether the 2006 bond has passed off the rolls, so it would be an increase, or whether it would just be maintaining that amount or increasing it slightly, and that's the Finance Committee issue. I also think that I agree that we don't want to have too many votes going before the voters at one time, which also gets me back to the other part of this issue is the operating fee, something that we as the council want to stick our necks out and somebody said one time, take a brave pill and do it, or do we not want to do it? And those are all things that I think we're going to have some discussions on in the future, including with the new counselors.
Well, I'll spend some time with Mr. Powers, and maybe we can kind of look at this. You'll be chairing our Finance Committee in the next go round. And so, so I'll also I'm sure we'll be in touch with you, trying to figure out how to put this together so that we can have a really meaningful discussion in council over the next year or so on this, and have the time you need to really put it together.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate you not telling me this in a tweet.
I don't tweet anything.
No. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
So I have a clarification question for Colleen. I thought I understood her to say that she wanted us to put the new revenue source, which was the public safety measure that we had put on previously, on the agenda so that we could consider it in year 2. And I'm not prepared to do that tonight. Is that what she asked us to do?
What I asked was for you to have this discussion. Are we ready to put this in the plan? And what I hear pretty strongly is we're not ready to put this in the plan. So this last bullet's going to go, and we are going to think about a way to present considering different revenue sources for city services, either in this next section coming up, or we'll reframe this bullet to be more about considering what to do in future years versus implementing the payroll tax in year 2.
Thank you.
Very good. Is that okay? All right.
Okay, great.
What else you got?
I've got one more very meaty slide here, which is about improving resident access to city services. This is my favorite. I'm just going to go ahead and let you all know. So we've got covered here diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, really focusing on e-government as well. There's a lot going on in terms of city's website and really thinking about making services more accessible, financial stability of the city, and then community engaged policing. So this is where the police department performance audit shows up. This is where the library strategic plan shows up. We want to make sure we're weaving those into this plan, as well as really thinking about, from the customer's perspective, when someone from the public interacts with the city, what is their experience like, and how can we make that more accessible, more equitable, and really get them what they need?
Okay.
I guess I don't understand the purpose of this slide, because except for the last thing that you said, I don't see how any of these things improve resident access to city services. Sorry. I mean, how does the library strategic plan improve resident access to city services?
Well, one thought, it could be we'll have free parking at the library. We could, I mean, there are things like that. The one I see missing is the role of the council in its relationships with its neighborhood groups to share information, that there's kind of a part of the job is attending your neighborhood groups to keep people informed from the council directly to them so they hear directly from their elected officials. That'd be one that catches my attention. To just sort of create that kind of collaborative sense with the residents, neighborhood groups and residents. But I think I see what you're saying. We have to complete the performance audit, and I think we all agree we're going to be very interested in how that may or may not improve resident access to city services. I went through a resident access, or my wife did. I actually heard more about it because my wife actually went through it, trying to access parking services, which can be for even the most informed citizen a true mystery. There are different things like that. Our access to services through the telephone system is I think, just a real maze for folks, and very, very confusing. And you better know the terminology, or you're going to have at least 2 or 3 bounces, things like that. And I think I hear that in this, in e-government and other suggestions. Does that make sense? Or am I not hearing it right? Boy, what do you think?
It's not working for me yet.
Not working for you yet? No. What do you want to say?
Well, all the other things have been very specific. These are things about having other people plan that don't necessarily do anything about improving resident access to city services.
Like what? Can you give an example?
The library strategic plan.
Yeah.
The police department performance audit. I'm not saying these things aren't important. I'm just saying I don't see how they relate to improving resident access to city services.
They provide us with information that we might want to use to improve access to city services that we hear about from our constituents at neighborhood group meetings or other kinds of forums. That's kind of how I'm thinking of what I'm hearing here, that it gives us platforms and ideas for improving services. Is that?
If I may, Mayor, I think certainly that is, I think that's true for both the police performance audit and the library strategic plan. Certainly council has discussed, the community has requested additional branch libraries, for example. Well, having a library strategic plan I think will help evaluate, will help formalize that request for council's consideration as part of an overall plan to improve the library. So I think this is, as the mayor said, and it's also an example of where I did not want, and council can, that's certainly council's choice. I didn't want the library strategic plan. I didn't want us through this, staff through this process to presume outcomes from that library strategic plan, to have the library jump ahead of other of the other planning initiatives that were shared earlier. So I think the library strategic plan may very well result in recommendations to improve access to services. Free parking was mentioned. Branch libraries have been discussed. There may be other recommendations, enhanced online offerings. So that would all flow from, in this example, the library strategic plan. And there may be similar specific recommendations to council, specific recommendations that can be acted upon by the police chief from the community policing performance audit.
I guess what I understand though, Steve, is that in our last strategic plan, we actually had branch libraries mentioned, and now, and which would improve resident access to city services. But now, instead of that, we're going to do a strategic plan, which doesn't do that at all. So I guess I don't understand. I'm missing this somehow.
What I think it would be helpful because I would like to understand what you're thinking of here. I think you're making a really interesting point. If it's that we're just planning, not implementing, that's our responsibility. that this should give you a batch, all of the various things discussed here, of options and ideas for the council to actually come forward and start doing its role of, you know, we need a better sidewalk repair program. What's that look like? You know, that kind of stuff that really is what the council is expected to be doing. That would be my thought on it. That's what I would assume you're thinking of, is what can we do directly to influence this? Sometimes you need somebody giving you some ideas. They're outlining some of the ideas available. Tom?
Yeah, I can see both sides of this, and I'm looking at the points that Councilor Hoy made, that what are these things, how do they actually improve residents' access to city service? And it seems to me that of the numbers or the letters Q, S, and T do improve resident access to city services. But I think part of the problem also might be with just the heading. You know, and so I'm not going to wordsmith it right now. That's for Colleen to do. But, you know, I said something like improving resident access to city services and the city's ability to service its citizens. I mean, it's not just, we just don't want them to get better access to us. We want to be able to serve them better through the access, the improved access that they can communicate with us, like Councilor Hoy. You know, we want an East Side library. We want a West Salem library. You know, so we think they can tell us that. The other thing I have different than that, but it still relates to the overall point, is opportunities to improve resident access to the internet through city action or partnership. We've talked about this a number of times, and where we've been talking about it was some sort of pilot project for free Wi-Fi downtown. And every time we talk about this, I say, hey, let's just not do free Wi-Fi downtown. Let's do free Wi-Fi for everybody. I mean, there are cities that do that. And that really is also kind of an economic justice issue too, because I'm sure those of us who have the Wi-Fi, we know what we pay every month for that, and not everybody can afford it. And, you know, there's other ways to do that. So that's kind of franchising, and Ryan Zink and other folks, you know, or maybe it's Zinke. I always get them confused with our former Secretary of the Interior. But, you know, the city needs to look at it that way. And is it possible? What would it cost for us to provide free Wi-Fi for everybody? And the Wi-Fi downtown project is a stalking horse for that.
Well, Chris, would you mind talking with Colleen or with Courtney to kind of make sure that it's really, they get a real clear picture of what exactly you'd like to have more specifically added. I think what you're saying makes sense to me. I just can't figure out how to get there from here. It's probably because I'm looking at where we are right now and what I'm looking at on the page.
It just seems like this is a step backwards. We had a plan that I thought was supposed to be the foundation for this plan. And now we've thrown out all of those things that were on it that we haven't accomplished. And instead, now we're going to do planning in those various departments. So it puts everything out a couple more years before it's ever even on a plan to be considered. And so then the residents in East Salem are going to go without a branch library for a couple more years. And, you know, I guess that's
same thing here in Northeast, inner Northeast, where we need a library as well. Or, you know, I know Virginia Stapleton needs sidewalks. I can tell you that right now. And I'm sure she'd love to have a specific plan in place that expands that sidewalk program. So I hear what you're saying, and I think it would be helpful if we maybe take a little time, each of us, and kind of figure out what we would suggest based on your analysis of this, because I think it's it is true, and I would like to go back and look at the old plan and make sure I understand what happened there. So,
Mayor, this is Jose. Something else I want to add is, you know, this is just year one.
Yeah,
sure is a lot for year one, you know, and it seems like a lot. Whether we can accomplish or not, that's something else. But I also want to make sure that if are we gonna prioritize any of these things, or are we gonna? Because some of these things could be annually reviewed. The website should be annually reviewed.
Yeah.
things that our residents can do virtually we should always be looking at that. I'm just trying to make sure we don't put too much on our plate and then nothing gets accomplished.
It's a good point.
And then,
Can I add something? Oh, sorry, Trevor, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I participated, Councilor Phillips, I participated in the last strategic plan update as a citizen, and it just feels like feels very different. And I think a lot of it just has to do with where we are at our point in time. There's a lot of things happening right now with all the other strategic plan updates and the comprehensive plan. And I think that this, these two perspectives that we're trying to balance right now are challenging because it's taking so much work just to do all of the planning at the same time. So I think some of it is just what we inherited by being in this session at this point in time.
That's a really good point.
I would like to add a little bit here. If Colleen, that slide that you have with all that big old list of things, for me, I think I would love to see those. It's a lot for one slide. It's a lot of different things going in a lot of different directions. And I think it would actually, and I think Councillor Hoy probably would agree with me here, it might be nice to separate some of these things out, and therefore maybe you could get a little bit more in detail or more bullet points for each, the library, what does that mean? And the police, obviously the police I think should be separate. Because there's just so much there. And then the other things are, the website, and there's some things that we could group together that would kind of help clear the waters a little bit, in my opinion. It kind of is a lot to back and forth as you read down the bullet points.
Yeah, and thank you for that. So can you all see this version of this information? This is a little bit more detailed in the actual Word document in the plan draft. And so what we have here is we've got 3 activities underneath diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we describe what that means. So in support of improving resident access, we're ensuring that city services are provided equitably to all city residents. Under e-government expansion, we're talking about increasing accessibility. And then we've also got library access here, financial stability, and then community engaged policing. So we've got more detail, and we will circulate the full document as well after today. So we'll give you some of the additional detail here. So I think that might also help to frame. I know we tried to mirror how it was presented to you in the staff report to avoid confusion, but maybe I think we're hearing we should have given you more detail. So here we are. But the other thing that I just want to point out in terms of what Councilmember Hoy said is that part of why we do these work sessions is so we can get that type of feedback, right? I don't understand how this improves access. So perhaps we also maybe need to think about how we frame this goal. Is this about improving access? Is this about increasing access and making our services more equitable? How could we better frame this so that we're truly making the connection between improving how we deliver service and really trying to improve accessibility and equitable service delivery?
Okay. Anything further then on this particular area? Okay, Colleen, is there anything else?
No, I don't think so. So we're going to provide you more detail, and then we can react to that more detail, and hopefully that will help to answer some questions. So this is pretty easy. Building great neighborhoods, we've got a couple of different objectives. I'm actually going to go to that other document as well. This is really focused on finishing our Salem, adopting our Salem, and then implementing those actions. And when we worked through this with city staff, what we really identified was everything we want to do truly hinges on our Salem. So that first year, we've got to get that accomplished. So our first objective is neighborhood development, and that's around really identifying how we can make more complete neighborhoods. Again, we heard this very strongly from all of you, and we really wanted to make sure that was reflected in the plan, making sure that people can get what they need done within their neighborhoods and creating more neighborhood connectivity as well. So that first year activity is really finalizing our Salem and helping to implement those actions. And there's a lot that has to be done there. Next is parks and recreation. So thinking about how we can continue to expand park access, making sure that we're serving everyone accordingly, as well as continuing to enhance and develop and expand parks. Again, dependent on our Salem. And then finally, bike ped safety, another really strong theme from all of you. We want to prioritize bike and ped facilities and make them safer, make transportation safer across the city. And again, that is dependent on our Salem. So within the plan, in the year one activities, we'll have our Salem as first. We've got a lot of stuff that will come up years 2 through 5 as a result of that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I like seeing the attention drawn specifically to the bicycle and pedestrian safety. Thank you.
Good. You'll like your years and years on the council because it seems to be perpetually in front of us. And
yeah, I'm double thumbs up on that one, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Colleen, I'm curious about why we're only talking about our Salem under this one. It seems like there's a lot more to building great neighborhoods than just our Salem. It seems like, you know, we talked earlier, somebody mentioned earlier about our neighborhood associations and that sort of thing. It seems like we're missing an opportunity to mention those sorts of things here, and we're just focused on one thing, which is our Salem. And it's an important thing, of course, but it just seems like we're missing an opportunity.
Yeah, so we could absolutely include additional community engagement, or what you mentioned earlier, the Council of Neighborhood Associations. We could definitely include that in this area as well.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I see lots of nodding along to that, so we could definitely do that. Okay, well, last but not least, oh, I'm sorry about that, Councilmember Nordyke.
No problem. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I agree that not everything pedestrian and park and neighborhood walkabouts has to do with our Salem. And I just wanted to give a couple examples. Croydon Trail and the Skyline Trail are beloved trails in our system. And there are times when even the Planning Commission has decisions that come before it. And last year they had a decision come before Planning Commission that was right next to Skyline Trail, but Skyline Trail wasn't even on the map. So Planning Commission made a decision that thankfully did not ultimately impact Skyline Trail, but I was still concerned because if it's not on the map, it doesn't exist. And so I don't know how to phrase that in this action agenda item, but I want to echo what my colleagues are saying, that there are things that happen that concern pedestrian, bicycle, and other forms of, you know, transportation area that occur outside of our Salem. Thank you.
And then Colleen, maybe the question is to you, but I'm going to need some help. I don't know how to phrase my question, but it's specifically regarding the city's efforts to address like safe routes to schools as like another example of what has already been, the work that's already been done. So how does this play with what the council that has come before us achieved to this point to kind of build on what's already been created? And then specifically, like, does that overlap with, or is it distinct from some of our efforts to get those crosswalks in important, you know, high pedestrian flow areas?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Those are both really good comments. And Peter, feel free to jump in if I don't cover everything. But I want to kind of take us back to some of our prior kind of framing discussions about this plan. So we've got all of this work that's already happening in the city that we're not letting go of, right? We have everything that's covered under priority-based budgeting. We have all of our core services. There is a tremendous amount of work that happens on a day-to-day basis with parks planning, with addressing our maintenance, with addressing our capital program, with working on our bike and ped and other transportation infrastructure. We're not going to lean out of that work. What's really reflected in the strategic plan is here are the areas, because we're a revenue constrained organization, where we're going to focus and lean in. And so we want to build around these priority areas and each year choose activities that we're leaning into. And so the activity that really has to get accomplished this first year is updating our Salem. All of that stuff happening in the background or, in front of your house, right? That's not going to stop. We're still going to do that. We're just leaning into finishing our Salem so that we can do things more deliberately and really try to reflect the new vision for the city in the updated comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
I think Councilor Nordyke said it best, that if it's not on a map, if it's not on a plan, it doesn't exist. And I think that's an excellent point. So we already have a transportation system plan that has a lot of bike and ped projects in it. We're already funding a lot of bike and ped projects throughout. That doesn't change. But why we are focusing and why Colleen's presentation says so much about our Salem is that's really foundational so that we can then amend the transportation plan, the parks plan, the water plan, the sewer plan, all these plans to align with what the community vision is once our Salem is adopted so that we can add these things that are already not on our plans or adjust our plans for our Salem. But as Colleen says, it doesn't change anything of what we're already doing with everything. So you shouldn't think that we're not chasing grants and we're not doing all this other work, irrespective of what's going on here.
Yeah, very good.
Anything else? Think getting the full draft plan will help, and we'll have another discussion when we've got the full plan in front of you as well. Okay, so taking action on climate change. We have two objectives in this area. The two objectives in this area are to reduce the city's greenhouse gas emissions and then increase the city's resilience to climate change. This, again, here we have another plan that's going on. So we want to finalize the climate action plan and get that going, and we don't want to get ahead of those efforts. We're also not going to pause on any of the city's current sustainability efforts related to any sort of greenhouse gas reduction or increasing our resilience.
Okay.
I expect in year two, this one's going to have a lot of detailed actions as a result of that plan.
Right.
Okay. If there are no comments on this one, then that actually takes us into a discussion of what happens next. And I'm going to stop sharing so that the mayor can see us all again. So what's next? So we are going to distribute a full draft of the plan so you can take a look at it. We're going to solicit your feedback individually on that. And once you've reviewed all of the narrative, my hope is that it will answer a lot of questions, but we're totally happy to have one-on-one conversations, as well as come back and have another work session to really review the full plan. We'll make some changes based on what we heard from all of you tonight. And then we'll hopefully get this plan adopted so that we can get started on implementation. But I would love to hear any other questions or comments that all of you might have tonight.
On the agenda, the two resolutions we're looking at were there. What was the intention there? What are we going to do with those now?
Well, if I may, Mayor.
Thank you.
Councilor Leung specifically in her motion Monday asked that a draft be provided to you this evening. Neither resolution is intended for action. You really can't take action at a work session, but they are available for your review and discussion this evening if you'd like. And we also thought they might be helpful to the discussion regarding mission and values and help provide some current information that council is considering regarding those important topics.
Okay. When will those be back to us for action?
They're both scheduled for your consideration and adoption on January 25th.
Okay, great, Monday. Okay, do we have any other action tonight or business?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This is just for Colleen, and I would guess Gretchen and Courtney, maybe either Gretchen or Courtney could schedule a time for us to meet, for me to discuss the first 4 pages of that with you as a group. And if you could do that, I'd be happy to do that in the next few days.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Does anyone else want to meet alone with folks about this strategic plan or any of this? Okay, well, I'm sure you all know to call Steve if you do.
And just as a reminder, one of the next steps will be, production of a document that looks like this for 2021, and that will have the additional detail and narrative more for the public and the community as the audience. And then that will lead to, as we did with the 2020 plan, a community report out on what was accomplished.
Yeah. I would really suggest, just a thought, and I'll look forward to talking to you more about it, but that the 2 resolutions we're looking at for next Monday somehow find a place in this strategic plan as an addendum or as a statement of letting the public know what we are committing ourselves to there. And I think getting those into that document and kind of explaining to us how to get it there, to have it make sense with the rest of the materials there, I think would be very helpful.
Mr. Mayor, that's one of the points I wanted to make in the first 4 pages. So I'll discuss that a little bit further with Colleen and either Gretchen and or Courtney.
Yeah, and I don't care if it's standalone or integrated, but I'd prefer to almost see them standalone because I think they're really good statements on several key items and expectations we have of ourselves and the Human Rights Commission and others. So, okay, great. Okay, then, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.